Should we get started? 5 up? Should we get started? All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. People are trickling in. Can everybody hear me? I get a show of hands from the cheap seats. You know, oh, you're right up front. I know you can hear. All right. Not very loud? Got to be louder. All right. I will try and speak up, or we'll turn up the volume. All right. I got to shout. All right. I see a lot of regulars here, which is great. We're happy to have everyone here. But for those of you who don't know, my name is David Douglas. I'm one of the co-independent evaluators of the settlement agreement implementation. With me here tonight is Michael Harrison, the other co-independent evaluator. And we work with a team of folks from Effective Law Enforcement for All. And our overall job is to monitor implementation of the settlement agreement, assist the department in implementing the settlement agreement, and of course reporting to the parties and to all of you about progress under the agreement. So let me review what we want to talk with you about tonight. Our agenda is so first, we want to talk about our role and our work. And I have a confession to make. For those of you who were at our last meeting, you may recall there were a lot of questions about whether we had any authority to do anything, particularly if we didn't have a federal consent decree or we don't run the department. And in answering, I said a lot about what we couldn't do. And after the meeting, I was kind of thinking that was really unsatisfying. And we all talked about it, and what we realized is the way things worked, we haven't really talked with the public and with all of you about our theory of change and about the change management process and what we're trying to do. So we want to start off talking about that tonight. Once we do that, we're then going to talk about our second semi-annual report and where the department is on the path to transformation. Then we're going to drill down and talk about actual changes to current policies and training. We're going to focus on the use of force policies and training. The policies were recently approved, and some of the training has begun. And you'll recall at a prior meeting we talked generally about how we review policies, and we talked generally about how we evaluate training. But now we're going to talk about actual changes to the policy and the training that have been adopted. And then, of course, we always have robust questions and answers from all of you. All right. So let's get started with our role. So first of all, at its simplest and narrowest, our role is determined by the settlement agreement. And the settlement agreement provides that the independent evaluator's primary duty is to fairly and efficiently evaluate compliance and move the city and MPD into compliance with the agreement. So you see in that sentence two critical elements. One is evaluation, but second is also our job to help move the department into compliance. And we may make recommendations, provide technical assistance. That means if they need help with a policy or how to do something, we have a team of experts. We give them that, share that expertise with them. And of course, we issue reports. But we do not have the authority to order or require the city, MPD, or the Minnesota Department of Human Rights or any employee to take or defer from taking action. We don't run the department. We can't tell anyone what to do. All we can do is observe, report, advise, coach, and ultimately determine compliance. The last one is just as important. We do not work for the city or MDHR. We are independent. Now, we're paid by the city, but they also cannot tell us what to do or what to say. We don't work for either of them. So if you reduce those here to this graphic, we do three things. We monitor, we coach, we report, and we do that over and over and over again throughout this process. But what I want to spend a little more time talking about tonight is the coaching piece of it, because I don't think we have talked about that with all of you as much as we should or need to. So let's start. Coaching transformational change. John Kotter is a guy who is really considered one of the fathers of transformational change, how it happens, when it doesn't happen. He is regarded by many as the authority on leadership and change, but you will notice that is a quote from John Kotter. It's actually from his consulting company. It's part of his bio, but I was kind of tickled by that. But in fairness, he really is. And he, in the 90s, put in the Harvard Business Review, Leading Change, Why Transformation Efforts Fail. He studied many companies that tried to make change, and then he looked at ones that were successful and ones that were unsuccessful. And out of that, he distilled 8 elements for successful transformation. And we're going to talk about that because that approach is really what informs our approach and something we follow. Now, John Kotter's not the only one who has a view about transformational change. We could have picked others, but they're all pretty similar. So we're not saying this is exactly the one or that there aren't others, but they all sort of address the same things. And so this is what we want to talk with you about, how we employ organizational change philosophies and practices to the process of implementing the settlement agreement. John? So according to Kotter, there are 8 elements to successful transformation. We're going to talk about those and how they apply to the work that's being done here in Minneapolis. So first, you have to establish a sense of urgency, because people don't just make big change unless they have big motivation, they have a big reason. So a sense of urgency, that is very much what you have here in Minneapolis as a result of George Floyd and the social unrest. And of course, that was just the last straw. But certainly from the summer of 2020, there was a sense here in Minneapolis of urgent need for transformational change. So then he says, the next thing is you have to form a powerful coalition, because it takes a lot of people to overcome resistance, inertia, things like that. And you all have formed a powerful coalition here. That coalition has many parts. You are all part of it. You all have been engaged in this process since long before we got here. We know that the Unity Community Mediation Team, as one example, has been in an MOU with the department for several years. We know that Communities United Against Police Brutality has been actively engaged in reviewing the department's policies and being a change agent. So they are part of that powerful coalition, and I don't mean to slight the many others that are as well. And of course, there was also a power in the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the DOJ for the time they were here. And then we too are part of that coalition. So all of us together are the coalition that is needed to drive transformational change. Now, to drive change, you got to know what change you're working for. So you have to have a vision for change. And in this context, that vision is in the settlement agreement, the Department of Human Rights settlement agreement. It's in the DOJ consent decree. But it's not just those 2 documents, because you all also have in the city a blueprint for public safety that addresses many of the surrounding issues that relate to, well, public safety and police work. So collectively, those documents form your vision, the vision negotiated by your representatives, by your department. That is the shared vision that we are all working toward. And you have to communicate the vision. So that's part of what we're doing in these meetings. There's other ways that it's communicated out. Although I will confess, I think it could be communicated out better by the city, by the department, because they are the ones who have to drive this change, and candidly, we try and urge them to do that a little bit more. Now, you have to empower others to act on the vision. The CEO of the biggest company in the world could not make transformation on his or her own. They would need to empower others to implement the changes necessary to achieve the vision, and that's what's happening here. So obviously we are part of that. The department is part of that, and they've brought on people to help implement the change, and they've restructured, so they've empowered people within the department to drive change. There are people empowered in the city to drive change, because many of the elements of the settlement agreement can't be implemented by just the department. They have to be implemented by other city agencies. But perhaps one of the most important elements of empowering people is that you all have been empowered. You all have voice and agency in this process, and it is partly our role to give you the information necessary to allow you to act. Let me give you a couple of examples. I was at my desk a few weeks ago, and I got an email from Chuck Turchick. Many of you probably know Chuck. Many of you have probably gotten emails from Chuck. And I mentioned his name. I did ask him, could I talk about him tonight? He couldn't be here, but he did give me permission. But he had sent an email, and now at the moment I'm forgetting the details, but the email said that he had read ELEFA's report, and it did not make a recommendation about, I think, a presence on the CCPO. Don't lead me through the slides. And so having read the ELEFA report, he said, I have an idea, why don't you do X? That email brought a smile to my face for 2 days. Why? Because someone read our report and acted on it. And that's part of what we are trying to do. More importantly, not only did he read it and make a suggestion, he was saying you should go above and beyond. And what you've maybe heard us say in the past is the settlement agreement, the consent decree, that's the floor. Our job is to make sure that we raise the floor, but we establish the floor, but you all will establish the ceiling. So we'll do our part, you will take it from there. Now, not all engagement brings a smile to my face. We get some criticism. We've gotten some very pointed criticism from groups that are following this process. Criticism that, whether we agree with it or not, sometimes it's frustrating, sometimes it's painful. But when we get out of our feelings, it's still engagement. And engagement in driving change requires tough conversations, and we can't be afraid to have tough conversations, to face difficult truths, or to hear difficult things. And we have certainly experienced that in the course of our work. And let me give you I think the biggest example of it. Collectively, this community spoke out about how training was being done recently. And your voices caused the chief to make a decision. It wasn't us, because as I said, we don't have the authority to direct the department to do to do things. And it's not within our authority to speak to it. But it was your authority to speak to it, and you did. So as we go through this path together, and that's why we're so committed to these meetings, to work with groups, to really make this work, it's really going to take a lot of voices who are all acting together to make change. And that's the process we are in. So people have been empowered to act, and then Cotter says you got to create short-term wins. Transformational change is the product of countless incremental small changes. If I were an auto manufacturer and I decided, you know what, we're not going to just be an auto manufacturer, we're going to make airplanes. We're not going to make an airplane the next day. We're going to hire people and we're going to do things day by day by day. It's going to be small change. In the big picture, what is happening here is very exciting. On any given day, it's a little bit tedious. It's lots of emails, lots of discussions, lots of going back and forth. But transformational change is the product of short-term gains, and it is important to acknowledge those gains. Cotter says you got to create short-term wins, because this is a long process, and if people don't feel they're winning, that it's worth it, they'll lose interest. And at the end of the day, the department has to make these changes. So we try and engage in a process where we are bringing them along, we're acknowledging what's happening, so that we create the short-term wins that fuel. Oh, yes.
Before you go on to the next two, there are 2 points I want to make. One when you're finished, but on this point, it's good to see you all. On this point, our role is a fine balance, a fine line, and a balance when it comes to the celebrating and acknowledging the short-term wins. It's like anything else. Everyone responds well to positive reinforcement, and as opposed to negative reinforcement. And so people will chase and people will pursue the feeling they have from positive reinforcement as opposed to shutting down from the feeling they got from negative reinforcement. So when necessary and when deserving, we make sure we acknowledge the short-term wins, but we also make sure we acknowledge the shortcomings and the downfalls and the pitfalls and the mistakes that are made. And it's a fine balance, and so we don't want to give it where it's not due, but we want to make sure that we're giving the positive reinforcement to positively motivate the agency to do the work that it promised it would do.
Right, but also to hold it accountable when it's not.
Hold it accountable when it's not, that's correct.
And I remember I missed your point about capacity and will.
I'm going to get to that when you finish this. Yes.
Okay. So wins. So now you got to consolidate the gains and expand. So we make changes, we consolidate them, we establish them, and then we use that to go to the next level and the next level and the next level until ultimately we've completed the process. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we have to anchor the change in culture. We are trying to change the culture of the department, and we will give you some examples about how that is happening in terms of policy and training. But we talk a lot about culture change, and that is what this is about. But you can't just change a culture. Culture is the product of formal and informal rules and shared values, so you build a culture over time. So for example, there will be a time when most of the officers in this department, in fact, there'll be a time when all have only known the new department that we're building. And I'm going to steal something from Michael. You're going to say it better, but Michael says initially people do the right thing because they think they're going to get caught. What did you say? Then they do it.
They do the right thing to avoid being caught. Then they do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
And then they do it because it's the only thing they've known.
Right.
Right? And that's when you get to the stage that someone says, we don't do that here, because that's not who we are. And we'll show you how we're trying to drive that when we talk about policies and change, policies and training.
Part of our role is
what did I say about leading?
Part of our role is the consistent and constant assessment of the department. When I say the department, I mean the police department and the city. Constant and consistent assessment of their will to do this work and their capacity to do this work. So every month when David and I and some others are in Minneapolis, and when we're on meetings most of the weekdays every week virtually, we're constantly and consistently assessing whether they have the willingness to do this hard work and this heavy lift. And if we find that they do not, we have to figure out strategies to motivate them to change so that they can have the willingness. And if they don't have the capacity, we make the assessment and then we make recommendations to teach them and point them in a direction on how to build that capacity. If we find that they're unwilling, then we make recommendations on We make recommendations on what to look for in personnel who are willing. While we can't tell them who to put in place, we can tell them what you need to look for in a person to do this work, to make the heavy lift, to make the hard, unpopular decisions that are the right thing to do, not because it's the right thing to do, not because it's what makes others feel comfortable and convenient. But we're constantly assessing their will and their capacity, and that goes to both the city and its leadership and the police department and its leadership. And when necessary, we make recommendations to them and we give them our experience of national best practices that have worked elsewhere that we think would work here.
And at the end of the day, if they don't do it, then we can report it to the state court judge. We'll report it to all of you, and you all have voices we just talked about. So while I didn't answer well last time, we do have an approach to this, and there is agency and authority in this room and in this city to make sure that the department and the city complete this work. And if you want an example of transformational change, all right, 5 years ago, we talk about a 5-year plan. 5 years ago, your Timberwolves were the 5th worst in the league. Last year, you're in the championship. Now, let me be clear. Do not come up to me afterwards and say, well, this is different. We're just trying to make a lighthearted point here. But it is that change does and can happen, but it takes time. But it's worth it when you do the hard work, make the commitment, take the time.
The team changed both its will and its capacity. And when it had both the will and the capacity working in sync at the same time, they moved to Western Conference champions.
All right, so now usually, as I was thinking about this, we do Q&A at the end. I'd like to do that, but if anyone has, since we have 3 discrete pieces here, if anyone has particular questions about this phase, we could take a few now, or you could save them till the end. All right, so that's our discussion of our role, how we work, and the way we approach it. So now we're going to turn to where we are in this process, what we reported in our most recent progress report.
So as we look at our second semi-annual report, we reported to you that the department was doing very foundational work. Building a brand new car and building a road for the car to drive on. Neither the road nor the car were here before. Now they're building both of those, doing this very foundational work. We are still in that foundational phase because while they have gotten some of the policies done and approved, which I will talk about in just a minute, there's still a lot of policy work to do. Still a lot of policy work to get approved, and none of the policies are yet implemented. While some are approved, none are yet implemented. And so we're still doing that work. We are now beginning to evaluate some of the work that they are doing to make sure that what they're giving us, we can fact check it and make sure that it's accurate and that it's thorough. And then, of course, we give compliance determination on things that make it all the way through the compliance determination. Only a few things have made it there so far. With the next slide, I'll be able to tell you where we are. We have, the department rather, has completed and have submitted to us who have approved 17 use of force policies. It's actually one use of force policy made up of 17 other smaller use of force policies, which we call the use of force suite of policies. They have been approved, and they have and the training for the use of force has been approved, and the training for the use of force has begun. It is not complete, so the policy is not implemented. It is approved, but it is not implemented. Crisis intervention policy has been approved. Their mission, vision, values, and goals document has been approved, and there are several others that are pending approval and are on the way to approval, including non-discriminatory policing, emergency medical response, and body-worn cameras are all underway, and we think will be approved in the near future. Training progress. The 2025 annual training plan and training needs assessment is completed and approved. Both have been praised as national models because your city and your police department has done something that we believe other cities will look at this policy, this annual training plan and training needs assessment, as a model. The crisis intervention team 8-hour refresher training has been delivered. It's not something our team has approved, but we needed to deliver it. They needed to deliver it really quickly, so we gave them permission to go out and deliver the training. And then the crisis intervention training for 911 dispatchers is not yet developed, but it's underway. The facilities, equipment, and non-database technology plan is almost complete, and they have launched the public website for filing complaints against Minneapolis Police Department personnel.
That's for the employees.
The city employees, I'm sorry. Under misconduct investigations and accountability, the recruitment and outreach strategy for Community Commission on Police Oversight has been approved. Investigative training has been delivered to both members of the Internal Affairs Division and the Office of Police Conduct Review, or OPCR, personnel. Both IAD and OPCR have made progress toward reducing the investigative backlogs. There is still somewhat of a backlog, but they have made progress in reducing it. We meet with them weekly, both entities, for them to report out to us on the progress they've made each week. We are concerned and are tracking closely that incoming cases that come in now don't create a second backlog. And we're always working with that, and they're reporting to us every single week on that. The standard operating procedures under the development to provide limitations on referring misconduct cases for coaching is underway and almost approved as well. Under officer wellness, the peer support program is established with 21 members trained, with more to be trained as we speak, and the early intervention system policy development is on track. Technological advancements, the data systems plan is completed and approved, and there is a new policy management software that has been demonstrated to the police department, and they are working to make a decision on whether or not that vendor will be a good vendor to provide that service for policy management. And there is a new development of case management system for misconduct investigations, use of force case reviews, vehicle pursuit reports. All that is underway as we speak. Now I think David's going to take us through some of the challenges.
Oh, gee, thanks.
I'm sorry. No, I'll take it. The policy development. The policy development process is a little slower than expected, and there are several reasons for that. There's been significant effort made by all the parties to make progress, but the pace impacts delays in required work downstream. And so every step of the way, there have been things that happen, things get submitted to us for review, they get submitted to MDHR for review, we go back and forth with the city and MPD, and so there are downstream delays with some of it, and some of it is vendors that have to be hired to do the work for the city to help with much of that. MPD and the city face competing priorities, balancing tasks with existing responsibilities. There are delays in hiring and onboarding external vendors, which I said, it takes a while for the public procurement process to play itself out, to make appropriate selection to hire vendors. So that takes a while, and that's not necessarily within the police department's responsibility to do that by themselves. The wellness unit is understaffed with 2 full-time personnel, but as I understand, 1 more was moved there just this week, so that's a 3rd person there. And OPCR and IAD both are filling vacant positions through the process, though there's been progress made. They continue to fill their vacancies. Under training issues, the crisis intervention refresher training is not approved by our monitoring team, but that's due to delivery issues. That's going to be vendor, and that's going to be the way they deliver, but it's underway and will be approved soon and delivered soon. The supervisor leadership training is not started, again, because the department is in search of a vendor to do both create and deliver the supervisory training. We believe that training, that they will have selected a vendor who will have created the training and have it delivered this fall. There's been disruptive behavior, which we pointed out in our report, some disruptive behavior that we have observed in the classroom over different trainings, but we brought it to the attention of the police leadership. They did something about it, they corrected it, and then we've not seen that happen like we did in our early observations. Current data systems lack automation and dynamic reporting capabilities. That hinders the analytics and the compliance tracking. We can't analyze and we can't track and effectively audit because the technology is not sufficient enough for us to do it. And so what we think we get is bad data, and what we would be reporting to you is bad information because there's bad data going in, because the technology is inefficient, and we're working to get them to do that. But again, that's a number of vendor issues along with staffing issues. When you put those together, That's what's causing those slowdowns. And then there's public-facing data dashboards that require further improvements to ensure accuracy and transparency, and all that's kind of wrapped up together. If the technology is not good, we can't count on the data coming out of it to be good, because the data that went into it, it's unsure if it is good. And those are some of the challenges that we have observed, and I think David is going to take us to next steps in looking ahead.
So as we look ahead for the rest of the year, we're still working on the policies. Thank you for the visual clue. So still working on the policies. We did just meet with the city and the department to talk about that schedule, and we're looking for ways to accelerate it. But we're trying to prioritize those that have the most impact. So just as we prioritized use of force, now we're going to really focus on stop searches, citations and arrests, non-discriminatory policing, which I think will come rather soon, officer wellness, critical incident reporting, body-worn cameras, and others. But those are sort of the priority ones, and we'll just keep you posted on the progress they're making as they move forward. Training has begun. They've done supervisor training on the new use of force policies, and they'll be rolling that training out to the department. We want to review the data that's been reported to us on the IA and OPCR backlogs. We've reported the data that was given to us in the prior report, but we're going to go behind it and just verify its accuracy. I think, here we go. Data systems, implementation of new data systems and data systems necessary to manage a modern police department is just critical. It is a slow process. You got to get vendors. It's going to take a while, but that's really in many ways a gating kind of requirement. We got to get those systems in place so that we can manage. You know, they say you can't manage what you don't measure, and until we have those systems, we can't measure. So those will be critical. Facility upgrades are underway. We have folks who are going to begin inspecting those. Michael and I have seen some, but we're just going to confirm that. Mm-hmm. So facilities have been improved for the officers, and that's an important wellness issue. And then we will be conducting community and officer surveys, or MPD surveys, this year. We're working it out now. We hope to begin the survey process this fall. It's not an exhaustive list of everything we'll be doing. We're working on virtually every part of the settlement agreement, but those are sort of the big issues.
I think one more thing about this slide before we move to the next one. We often hear from community members that we've been at this for a while and we are not seeing a change in policing on the streets of the city. Well, here's where we are. We're still writing and approving policies, writing and approving training, delivering on the training from the approved policies, but the policies are not technically implemented until the people are trained on the policy, but then the training takes a while to develop and get approved. So we're seeing it too. We're not seeing the performance distinctions and differences that we think we will see when officers know their policies and have been trained to them and then perform to both the policy and training. And so we hear that and we get that, but we're seeing the same thing. I wanted to just share that with you, that we hear you.
Yes. And our process is they do the policies, do the training, and then we begin to audit, and then we'll begin to report to you where the performance is, and then the important thing will be the trend over time, and we'll want to see continued improvement over time. But it is a long process, and we appreciate the frustration that generates.
And that frustration, you know, we not only see it and feel it, the police department does as well, because they had to prioritize which of, they're all important. Everything is important, but they had to prioritize which of these things is so important that we need a new policy and we need to begin the training as soon as possible right now. And so in collaboration with MDHR and ELEFA, use of force was the obvious most important thing, the biggest and heaviest lift, so it was addressed first.
Questions about our report? We wrote a long report. Some people have read it, so there's more information there, and we have summaries of the report back there on the back table. We actually have summaries. I was supposed to mention this. Summaries of our first report and our second report on the back table, as well as a little blurb about ELEFA and a third thing. And a copy of our implementation evaluation plan. So if you want something to take home with you. Sir.
One second, we're going to get you a microphone, okay?
While we're in a lull, I'll just mention, you don't need to write down all of the things on the slides. We're going to publish this on our website, so you'll be able to go to it after the fact, see everything. Understand that it's a little bit close to the screen. We couldn't turn the lights off on this one up here. We don't have the people who have the ability to turn them off.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get them posted. Yes.
We're going to get you a microphone so we can hear you. Give me 1 second.
I'd just like to bring up the question about training. It's not just reading a book or understanding, it's about doing what it's about doing what is in the rules. Not just say, this is what you ought to do and go by. You've got to show them how to do it, give them interesting ways of dealing with those things that they find difficult. And it's not to say they're ignoring them, but they have to know why it's important and how to do it.
Correct.
That's the training. It's not just reading a book and getting 100%.
You're 100% right, and that's what we're going to talk about next, how they're effectuating training in a better way than they've done in the past. Yes, sir.
We have the question and answer portion. Can I ask you a question?
I was going to save general questions till the end, if that's okay. I just wanted if people had specifics about what was in the report. Okay. So John's question is a great segue to the third thing we wanted to talk about, which is actual policies and training that have been approved and how they're different. So for those of you who were at our, I think probably our last meeting, we gave an overview of the policy revision process, and just to recap, we look to see that it complies with the settlement agreement. They're clear and executable. They incorporate public feedback. We'll talk about some examples of where that's been done. They align with the guiding principles, and that generally they reflect best practices. So now what we want to talk about is how that has resulted in new use of force policies and training. So we've summarized here some of the key changes to the policies on higher standards. Use of force, it now must be objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional. Necessary and proportional are two critical elements. We'll talk about those in a minute. There's now an affirmative duty to de-escalate. Officers are required to de-escalate where they can, rather than it being a suggestion. Protect members who report misconduct or intervene to avoid misconduct. There's a greater degree of supervisory review. Close and effective supervision is really key to driving change in the department, and the policies achieve that. And finally, higher standards on weapons pointing, and I want to land there for a minute because that is an example of going above and beyond the settlement agreement, but it's a great example of where public input affects the process. In the settlement agreement, uses of force are classified by 4 levels. And pointings, when an officer draws his or her gun and points it at someone, in the settlement agreement, that's a level 1, the lowest level of force. Well, it was pointed out that that's a little unsatisfying, because having a weapon pointed at you is a really traumatic thing. And I don't have permission to name the group, but if they want to volunteer, but the group wanted it to be classified at least as a level 2, a higher level use of force that requires a supervisor to respond to the scene. Well, because the settlement agreement characterized it as a level 1. We didn't have the authority to move it to a level 2, to require that it be a level 2. And the department had concerns about it, but the department also recognized the concerns about pointings. So they subjected pointings to a higher level. Now if an officer points, they have to contact the supervisor, and the supervisor has to review the incident that same day. Now I know that, I see Michelle, we can deal with this. I know you are disappointed with the result, and I understand that. But what I want to make the point is, it was a change over and above the settlement agreement, and it was a change made in response to concerns raised by the public. Pardon?
The community input.
Community input.
And the community input really drove that. You made it known that you thought it should be a higher level. Supervisor response to the scene, supervisor review of body-worn camera, all of the things to ascertain whether de-escalation was attempted and or deployed. Although it's not a level 2, we proposed it to the police department and city, and they acknowledged that while it couldn't be a 2, we did a carve-out provision for it to be a 1, but a supervisor has to review the body cam footage of every pointing to ascertain whether de-escalation was attempted, successful or not, and did the officer do anything to escalate the other person's aggression that made the officer think they had to pull the weapon out and point it. So that's part of the review that supervisors now have to do, even though pointing is still a level 1. There's a carve-out that makes supervisors do that. That's what we in the future will be auditing, because the goal is to not have unnecessary pointings of a weapon. And it should only be done when absolutely necessary, because the circumstances dictate that. And an officer feels that their life or someone else's life is in such danger that it requires that. Other than that, it should not happen. That's what we'll be auditing and coming back to you to tell you how they did.
And there are new requirements. There is now a full section on de-escalation. There are now new requirements for considering how officers' actions affect vulnerable populations. Temporary plastic cuffs also are subject to the objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional standard. That was another suggestion made by a community group. The handcuffing policy was objectively reasonable and necessary, but they noticed it didn't apply to temporary handcuffs, so they made that comment, and that was incorporated into the policy. You have to give time to comply with orders, and we'll talk more about this. Critical decision making. Officers are now trained. The policy requires officers to go through a well-established critical decision-making process, and they're trained on that critical decision-making process. Well, let's go to the next. So let's go. I think it's youth, elderly, physical or mental or emotional handicap or limitations. Language. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to de-escalation, the current policy. Now I want to be clear what we mean by current policy. As Chief Harrison said, the policies get written, we approve them, but they're not actually enacted until all officers have been trained. You can't hold them accountable to the training. So we now have the current policy is what we've been working on, and then we're going to talk about the approved policy. So this is the old policy, and then we'll talk about the new policy. So the old policy said when it is safe to do so, officers shall. De-escalation tactics include but are not limited, and they shall use de-escalation. But it was very short and did not give a lot of guidance. So let's go to the new policy. Now the policy is clearer that sworn members have a clear affirmative duty to de-escalate whenever feasible. Members shall not use tactics that unnecessarily escalate an encounter or create a need for force. Do you want to talk about what we...
Yes, and we said this in our report, that we observed their quarterly review panels, especially on the one on uses of force and the one on stops. Officers, some of the officers in some of the videos we were observing were escalating. They will stop an individual, and their approach was such that they actually escalated the residents' behavior that made them have to escalate their approach. And then at the end, they were then calming the citizen down and doing a good job of de-escalating at the end and explaining why they stopped the person and why they did what they did. So they did a good job of explaining at the end, but what was missing was the officer created the escalation that they caused them to use force. It caused them to have to take the person out of the car, put hands on, make an arrest, all of the above. De-escalation was not attempted on the very front end. Procedural justice was not done on the front end. Had it been done on the front end, there would have been no need to explain why and smooth it over at the very end. Now, we have brought that to the attention of the department. They have made corrections and going forward, understand what needs to be done. We've pointed that out in our semi-annual report to you.
You can go to the next. All right. So we talked about the current policy talks about objectively reasonable force. That's long been the legal standard. But the new policy is objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional. What does that mean, Chief?
In your state law, it talks about objectively reasonable force. Now, settlement agreement and what we're moving to now is objectively reasonable, necessary. Is it necessary to use the amount of force that the officer is using? While it might be legal, it might not be necessary. And we want the officers to make the distinction between what is authorized and what is actually needed, and only use the force that's needed and not just comply with the lower state standard of reasonable. Proportional has to do with using the amount of force necessary to overcome the force being used against the officer or the resistance giving to the officer trying to perform an action or to prevent someone from fleeing. So the example I give when I explained it to some of the officers in one of the roll calls is, you wouldn't try to kill a mosquito with a baseball bat. That's disproportional. You would not try to kill a fly with a tennis racket. That's disproportional. It is not proportional to the thing you're trying to accomplish. And so only what is necessary, not what's legal, but what's necessary, and using only the force that is proportional to the force being used against the officer, or the force proportional to the aggression and the resistance a person is giving to get away and not be apprehended. Did that make sense, or was that clear enough? And that's where we are with the new standard.
Yeah, so the question is proportional. I think that's right. The question is proportional force.
Right.
And so how do you get that to the new officers who are being trained in?
Yes.
And what do you do to the whole police force and tell them what proportional means, and then how you get them to go there, as you all are the ones who moving us through this, but yet our community, most of the people in our community don't know what proportional means when you stop me.
Got it. Great question. That's what the quarterly review panel is all about. We meet, and so when they go over stops, searches, arrests, we look at videos and they show us what they did. Now, the videos we saw were from old training and old policies. They were somewhat dated, but we noticed how they were performing, and we gave recommendations. So as ELEFA, as the department audits itself, as ELEFA audits the department, and then we tell you whether their audits are accurate, and then we tell you what our audits show, we look at those videos, and then we say, okay, we saw this, we all in the room saw this, let's figure out who sees the same thing, who agrees or disagrees, let's figure out what the right way to have done that is. Maybe it was done correctly, well, we'll acknowledge that. If it wasn't done correctly, let's figure out and let's make the department see, here's a better way to have handled that. What is your department going to do to correct this? Not just with this officer, but with everybody this officer works for and with the department at large. And so one incident can create a different training or something different that everybody should now know, okay, this is how we used to do it. Here's the way we're going to do it going forward. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I get, you like the fly swatter? Can we give a reason, she asked the question, I don't know if everybody could hear it. Can we give an example, a real world example of what proportional looks like? Yes. I want to make sure I give you something that's real world to Minneapolis and not something I've heard from somewhere else. A police officer tackling a toddler, like you wouldn't, a reasonable person would not do that. That is not necessary. Or a person in a bathing suit coming out of a swimming pool and the officer wants to check them for weapons. That's not reasonable. A reasonable person would not make the assumption the person's armed coming out of a swimming pool. Or if a person walked outside with their underwear on, he said, I want to check you for weapons. Like, that is not reasonable. And we would not expect that the department would do that. We would expect that they would not do that because a reasonable person would not do that. I think that's a close enough example.
Can I just?
And a reasonable person wouldn't do it, but the mere fact you can see and make that determination that they're unarmed, it is not necessary.
Okay, so the objectively reasonable standard is a legal standard that the Supreme Court has. The problem with it is it's measured from the perspective of an officer. So the question is whether it's reasonable to other officers. And even the case, Graham v. Connor, that articulated that was just a terrible set of facts with a person having, I think, a diabetic coma. It was just, right? But the court said, well, to an officer, it could be objectively reasonable. But the additional elements that I'll ask Chief to talk, but it wasn't necessary. Let's ask that question above and beyond what the law might require. And the Supreme Court just issued a new opinion that sort of changes the objectively reasonable. We're not going to get into a whole law school class over it, but the standard has been loosened arguably a little bit. But really then the question was, was it necessary? And maybe an example is you have someone who is kind of resisting, they're not going along. Was it necessary to tase them? Probably not.
Yeah,
but
and so the culture is such that we become conditioned. Cops become conditioned to doing things over and over the same way, even when it's not the right way. So hypothetically, a call can come in about an armed person in a pool. So you got the call that they may be armed, but when you get there, they're getting out of a pool with a bathing suit on. While you have this loose information that they might be armed, you can see that they're not armed. So it's not reasonable to think you're going to go pat them down wet or search them. Or it's not necessary and it's not reasonable. That's one of the best examples I think I can come up with off the top of my head. There are many more, but that's one. Yes? The department chose the videos. They went back in time. They chose some videos of stops that could rise to the level of being suspicious, stops, arrests, searches, but the department chose the videos to use as training for the quarterly panel review that members of our team, MDHR City, we sat in and we observed their assessment of their own videos. Yes. Her question was, going forward, will this happen every quarter? The answer is yes, and we will be part of the review of that. MDHR is part of the review. The leadership of the police department is in there, and they are assessing their own interviews, and we are assessing them to make sure they're assessing themselves correctly. The goal of this settlement agreement is for Minneapolis Police Department to inevitably become a self-assessing, self-correcting agency. So when we're gone, they should be able to do this to themselves on their own, assess and make corrections.
And in addition to that, we'll also audit. We'll take a random sample of encounters,
Yes.
look at the body-worn camera video for compliance.
Yes.
So it'll be not self-selected. Yes, sir.
I'm glad that you're talking about the de-escalation policy. And the policy that existed before was extremely bare bones. But I do want to point out that the new policy is only 3 1/4 pages long. I looked at Baltimore, smaller print, smaller headers, 6 pages long. A lot of them are 7, 8, 9 pages long. They give a lot of guidance. And I do want to acknowledge that there is a lot of good stuff in the de-escalation policy, such as respond to questions directly, explain without threat how a person would benefit from cooperation. But there's a lot of it that is simply don't escalate, like don't taunt people. That's a good thing to have in there, but I wish there was more content. Again, saying Baltimore, they talk about ask the person's name, tell them your name, palms up, all pieces like that that are giving more direct guidance. And also there's a lot of pieces in here that I think aren't really de-escalation. It's just more police. Like they talk about giving someone a reasonable amount of time to respond to an order. That isn't de-escalation. That's avoiding excessive use of force, because if you don't give them a reasonable time to respond, then you're breaking the Supreme Court's reasonableness. Things like consider your legal authority to act. Aren't all police always supposed to be considering their legal authority to act? So why is that in the de-escalation policy? So of those maybe 2.5 pages of content, maybe a page of that is really good de-escalation and similar guidance, but a lot of it seems to be really rough. And I think about your statement of this is the foundation, and what are we going to see once the training is implemented and 2 years down on the road? Is this a strong enough foundation to see really good results? Or is this something that we had to get a change and we're going to circle back to an improved version later? I guess I'm worried, and I'd like to hear some reassurances on that, because I see this as rough.
Some of the points you've made are addressed in like the procedural justice. There are different policies where different things are covered. And what you'll see is de-escalation is covered in many different places in policy and training. I can't quite answer the 3 pages versus the 6 in Baltimore, although the people who reviewed it worked in Baltimore, or at least think. So I think it's been captured if it's been articulated, but maybe articulated differently and maybe placed differently. Some things we can discuss. So for example, giving people time to comply, it is a de-escalation tactic, particularly as measured against what we've probably all seen as traditional, get down on the ground, and it's suddenly, and they're just, and you can see, it's all over YouTube, the person's confused or they're not sure, right? So giving someone a time to comply, giving everyone time to think, it actually, I would argue, is a de-escalation policy. Considering the legal basis, maybe I'll give you that one, but what it ties to is what we'll talk about in a minute, is the critical decision-making process. So what we're trying to get the officers to think about is, what is my legal authority? What am I trying to do? So it's kind of a package. So it's really important to understand that you can't capture everything in any one policy.
Yeah.
You can't capture everything in all policies. Training is important, so it's all throughout, so it has to be holistic. I don't want to quibble with you over the examples. I think there's always, part of the reason this takes so long is we all argue about whether it goes here or there, has it been said right? So I certainly accept
I think that's what I was going to say also, that I was going to say a little bit of that too. They didn't have a de-escalation policy at all. Now they have one. But de-escalation is interwoven all throughout the 17 use of force policies that make up the use of force suite of policies. In the upcoming stops, searches, and arrests, it will be interwoven all throughout the stop, searches, and arrests and the non-discriminatory policing. Like, it's interwoven into all of that, but they didn't have a standalone de-escalation policy, but now they do. But it is interwoven in all the rest of it, as David said. And in uses of force, it's really covered because now they have a duty to de-escalate, but they have a duty to not use language and tactics that elevates and escalates. Not only should they de-escalate, they should not escalate. And so that is a big core portion of what use of force and stop searches. Use of force is now, and what stops, searches, and arrests and citations will be when it comes.
don't know if you're going to address this later or not, but I'm really curious whether this seems like a big project management assignment, but I'm not seeing a beginning or a laying out of all the things. You have many, many issues you have to address, but there's nothing to say this is being addressed right now, and I don't know when your actual start date was, but is it possible to see and know what has been taken on by you since you started, what has been completed, and what is still in process? Because a lot of things you even spoke about today saying it just started last week. And the other thing I want to know is, how is this enforceable? Who is the authority behind this agreement that was struck to make you come up with all the policies? Is it possibly being enforceable? Because there's still, this will be the objections of people for and against the way we do policing in Minneapolis. And it's coming up in a couple, in the election, to be, I'm for it or not, because they don't know what's going on. All this stuff, I haven't heard many things that have been definitive. And I can understand the ambiguity of all the things that he was mentioning about this and wanting to get more specifics like Baltimore, because at least it's detailed and written down and you know it's being enforced or actually practiced. Not a suggestion to our training, but this is actually enforceable. If you are a police officer in the city, this is what you will do, or else this will happen to you in a review. And it won't be selected by your force of who will be reviewed. It'll be all of you will be reviewed based upon this policy. And I understand, hey, a couple of years, everyone will be out and we have a new group and a different mindset to take over. But I really would like to know if we could see the progress that is being made and know the authority behind these policy decisions that you're throwing at us, a lot of information, and know where this is coming from. Right now,
there are two reports. There are two reports that are on our website. Our first report.
I'm sorry.
Yes, he wanted, his question was, is there something to demonstrate what has already been done? Because what he's saying now is what is to come. But he wanted us to point him to what has already been done, and could we show that and demonstrate what's already been done, and who is the enforcer of this, that enforces this, like what will happen to the department should they not meet the terms and not meet the deadlines and all of that. There are two reports that we have written.
Also, what is up there? You said a lot of policies that aren't being aren't in practice yet, but they're just in works. No, I don't have a microphone.
Right here.
The HVAC system is so loud.
I'm sorry.
We can't hear.
I'm asking for, if this was a project management report, you'd have things that are proposals, things that are completed, and those things are still up in the air. And also, how is this enforceable? And when is it a time for us to expect something to come from this? Because right now, you're hearing a lot of things, a lot of procedures, and obviously you know a lot about police work and the inner workings of it, but it doesn't say that this is going to be enforced or police officers are going to be held accountable for the things that they've agreed to. And I wanted there would be a checklist of saying this is completed, this is completed, this is still in action right now. That'd be a pretty long checklist right now, based upon what you've said, reported on so far. Because I haven't seen any dates that say this is something we're doing right now, agreed upon, practice, and it's being done and taught to all police officers, and it's hit the street this way.
So I think this is our fourth or fifth community meeting, but we've issued two reports. The answers to many of those questions are outlined in our first and our second report. Our second one just came out a few months ago. And what has been done, what has been approved, what has been completed by the police department and our city is outlined in that second annual report, which is on our website. And that's there. And we talked about that in our last community meeting. We're talking a little bit about it now. A lot of what's being built is still being done. A lot of policies are still being written. And this is it's a long process. We get that. But a lot of it is still being written. A lot of the training is still being developed. Training that every single member of the department will have to go to. And some of it is one-day training, some of it is 3 days, some of it is an entire week training that all of them will have to go to. But the training is being developed. It will inevitably be approved by us, and we will ensure that they do it, and we report out to the community. But many of the answers to the first part of your questions are in our semi-annual reports, and we lay out everything that has already been completed.
And on your question of how people are held accountable, So we have the policies of training, then supervisors, and then we audit and review. That is the policy, so it will be followed. Now, in terms of the settlement agreement, ultimately the court will decide whether the department is in compliance with the agreement.
Like I said, how long is it, when did we start date, with specific start date? And compared to right now, how many things are actually not policy, not theory, but actually being practiced?
I would refer you to our report. It's kind of detailed, so I would just refer you to our report. That's where we give that level of detail. No, I want to go to the, we want to do training.
We're almost there.
So the training has been completely revamped. So new training concepts, lesson plans, tools. It's all based on policy. There's much greater detail in the lesson plans and in the officer workbooks, and we'll give you a sense of that in a minute. It centers around 14 guiding principles that we'll talk about, and it teaches the critical decision-making, mission, vision, values, goals, and tactical instruction all together. It's really captured in this generally established sort of philosophy of training. It's all grounded in the department's mission, vision, values, and goals. And as we reported, that statement has been approved by us. Critical decision making, we'll talk a little bit about that, but what we want officers to think about are all the elements that we've talked about, and one thing we'll talk about is this notion of a warrior mentality or a guardian mentality, right? It used to be that trained on the warrior mentality, win every encounter. Now we want the officers to understand that everyone is in their care. We want officers to think of the whole person. We want to deal with officers as the whole person. And we want them to think critically about what they're trying to do. So this is the foundation now for everything that's taught. And John, let's go to the next slide.
This is a lot on here. This is not meant for everybody to read, but we'll kind of get you through what's on this screen.
But here's what we want you to understand. So this was the current use of force policy, 8 pages. The new policy, the instruction notes, the visual, all these training materials, these were the training materials, 8 pages given to the instructors. Now the new training is 475 pages. Now that's not all teaching, but that's like workbooks. I have a couple up here that are given there. It is much more robust, much more detailed. Let's go back 1 second just. And here, what you see is a much more detailed lesson plan that's much more like an academic institution. Here you see the content over here, and then these are the instructor notes. We tell the instructors, this is what you have to cover, this is what you have to address, and it's laid out in detail for everything, so it's less discretion for the instructor, it's no more death by PowerPoint, it's a much more adult-based learning approach where they do incorporate classroom instruction, group discussion, role plays, hands-on.
Scenario-based.
Pardon?
Scenario-based.
Scenario-based training. Now let's go. And this here, do you want to talk about the critical?
No, go ahead.
So this is what they did not have before, critical decision-making model, and they run through this with the officers in the training over and over. It infuses everything they do, which is like gather the information, assess the risk, consider the authority to act, identify options, act, review, reassess. It's a constant cycle, all grounded in the sanctity of life, the mission, vision, values, and goals, and concepts of procedural justice. With respect to force, these are the force guiding principles, 14 principles to guide use of force. This did not exist before, but these are the foundational values and considerations that now officers are being trained on to inform when and whether and how to use force. We can go to the next one, John. This is just so now for the courses, they have workbooks, they get the statutes and policies, but in the classroom, some is lecture, as I said. Sometimes they will ask the officers at the table, here's a scenario, discuss how you would handle it, and then report out to the group. Sometimes they say in your workbook, write the 3 requirements for X or something like that. So it's a much richer educational experience. So just wanted to give you a sense of how elaborate the new lesson plans are. So here's a use of force. This is for a deadly force scenario, but what it tells is the instructor, here's the goal of the course, the time of the course, the goal for the module, the learning objectives. At the end of the training, this is what the officers will be able to do, or what they will know. It's linked to the settlement agreement. There's supporting materials. It's got the Minnesota mandatory elements. Over here, this is actually side by side of one page, but it's the training environment. It's like 32 students, who the audience is. It's a classroom, it's a room diagram, and this one, course references are in the student notebook. It even breaks out how the instructor is to devote their time. First 15 minutes, scenario facilitation, and then they have plenty of time for classroom discussion after they've done the scenario. So a lot of the training is scenario-based. We watch the officers go through it. I was there when they were doing extraction from a vehicle. They actually hire people who kind of wear pads at their exercises. The person refuses to get out of the car, and then the officers are judged. Did they first try to de-escalate? Did they use proper techniques? That's for the field. But then there's other, of course, much more low-key encounters, all of which are drilled with the officers. And this was not done before. And then even we tell the instructors, here's what you need. You got to bring markers and writing utensils. This is all the stuff you need. And then the student resources. So it's much more detailed, much more controlled than it was previously. Now Q&A. So let me just,
John?
Oh yeah, John. So that's just that we can't go through all the training, but what we want you to see is that the training is much more detailed, much more robust, and really done in contemporary adult learning principles. I'm going to start with Michelle there in the back, then I'll work my way front.
Thank you, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I cannot tell how loud I'm talking. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Because with that air conditioning, it's filling up my ears. So I just have 2 questions. One is I wanted to go back to where you talked about the technology for a second, and you were talking, I think you said something along the lines of they're getting new technology to manage policies, manage, I can't remember the other things that you said. Is this an integrated system, or is this like little separate systems that once again won't talk to each other?
The goal is to have them talk to each other. It's an integrated system overall. Different vendors do different parts, but it is an integrated system.
Yeah. Is it benchmark analytics?
It is, yes.
Okay,
Benchmark
thank you.
Analytics is handling early intervention, and I believe in internal affairs. The department is embarking upon a records management system and is in the process of obtaining a records management system. Then there's a case management system for internal affairs and OPCR. A vendor is being sought for that.
Okay. So the second thing I want to talk about, though, and is important, and that's about this gun pointing business. You talked about it being slightly elevated from a level 1. I want to tell you something about it. One of the reasons that you all told us that you weren't going to elevate it to level 2, which is what we thought it should be, is because it would be too much work for the supervisors to go out to those scenes. We're on task that by the end of this year, we will have about 2,000 gun pointing incidents by the Minneapolis police. And when you look at the reasons for those incidents, it's typically things like traffic stops, suspicious vehicle. It's not dangerous situations. And gun pointing is a very dangerous activity because you could easily pull the trigger and kill somebody. Gun pointing should not happen unless you think the use of deadly force might become an issue. So I'm deeply troubled by this, and more particularly I'm deeply troubled because the other thing that people said was, oh, well, it's not in the consent decree. But neither are takedowns, and takedowns were made a level 2 use of force. But gun pointing isn't. And, frankly, we are not accepting that. We're not going to accept that. One of the things that we know, I went through all the numbers right off the city's website. That's their data, not ours. And African American men are 18 times more likely to get a gun pointed at them. Native American men are 44.9 times more likely to get a gun pointed at them. These things cannot be explained by what is happening on the scene. This is racism. This is disparate treatment of people. This is the very stuff that this consent decree is meant to address. And by letting the Minneapolis police keep it at a level 1, I cannot begin to tell you how disappointed and disgusted I am. These things are things that you all had to approve. MDHR and you guys had to approve those policies. Yeah, maybe you don't write them, but you have to approve them, and you approve that. And so I'm here to say that we strongly object to that. We think it, again, represents grotesquely disparate treatment of people of color, and we're not standing for it. Thank you.
So let me just address that a bit. Agree with you, pointings are too high, and the way we're addressing that is through too many pointings. And pointing should only happen when deadly force is authorized, and that's going to be addressed through policies and training. In terms of approval, just so you understand the system, the process, our authorities determine whether a policy complies with the settlement agreement. And it's the settlement agreement that made it a level 1. So that is,
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Give her the microphone.
I hear you, I respect your position, and I certainly agree you can take it to the department. That like, again, we're the floor. We're not saying it's the best policy, you can do better. I'm just saying there are limits to what we could do, what we could achieve. John?
I'm wondering if the use of force policy and the training, to what extent does that incorporate the fact that we're seeing a much higher percentage of
A little closer.
we're seeing such a much higher percentage of the crimes that are committed with guns. We know there are many more guns in the last even 6-8 years on the street, and we're trying to respect sanctity of life, but how do you work in that sensitivity to the fact that almost any altercation now may have a gun with it?
That's a hard one, so I'm going to give it to the chief.
That is a hard one.
John.
That comes with good, strong policy and good training. And when the officers take into all that we've told you about today, and there's so much more, when they take in the sanctity of life and all of that, making sure, even though a person may be armed, the approach has to be such that the officer does not escalate. And when it is objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional, the officer may encounter someone with a gun. Not everyone with the gun has a gun intended to use against the officer. The assumption should not be made that everyone with a gun wants to use it against the officer, but the officer has to have enough skill and precaution to protect him or herself and others when they make an approach with somebody that could have a gun. But there's a lot of, you have to know the policy and you have to be proficient. Not just take the training, be proficient at your job, proficient at the skill to be able to make the approach that does not elevate or escalate, but de-escalates. And when you find that a person has a gun, in that moment, make the assessment and figure out what level of force is required to overcome that.
And it goes back to the critical decision making, right? Just having a gun is not necessarily a threat. someone may have the gun, they may have a license for the gun. The gun may be in there. They may, when you stop and a person says, I have a gun, I'm licensed, it's in my right. So we want the officers to think about it. That's the critical decision making. Assess the facts. Is this person a threat? There was an exercise I happened to observe where it was a young person with a gun. They were actually drilling it. The way they do it, it's in the classroom. The officers who are undergoing the exercise are out in the hall. They don't know what's going to happen. They come in. But what they noticed is they had a gun, but they weren't pointing the gun. And their first step was to please get right. So all of these, there are ways to approach this, and that's what we're training officers to do, to think about the situation, assess, evaluate, all those things, and that's what they train on, so that they are trained to deal with the wide variety of situations in which they may encounter someone with a gun.
Leadership is obviously really critical to changing the culture and reinforcing all these changes that they're going through. And going to supervisors, you talked about communicating to supervisors. Who are the supervisors? And are sergeants and lieutenants supervisors, or are those just different ranks of supervision, or of different ranks of officers? And do the supervisors get trained on basically how to reinforce all these new things that people are learning?
Great question. Sergeants are what's called frontline or first line supervisors. Sergeants supervise police officers. Lieutenants are usually commanders of an entire platoon, a shift of sergeants and officers. Lieutenants supervise the sergeants who supervise the officers. And so you may have one lieutenant supervising several officers who may supervise a large group of officers, sergeants who supervise a large group of officers, but the sergeants are the frontline supervisors. Yes, they are supposed to be trained on how to recognize performance patterns, behavior patterns, and take the appropriate action to improve it, to take training and discipline when necessary. They have not all been given that. That is now being developed. There's a whole supervisory leadership course that's being sought after through a vendor and developed to be provided for sergeants. What is a sergeant? What should a sergeant do? What is a sergeant responsible for? How to handle these situations that your subordinate employees are doing things either good or bad. You should be rewarding them for the positive work and then reprimanding them for the negative, and making sure that everyone that you supervise understand what mistakes were made, how to improve it. That has not been done as well as it should. They're now focused on making sure that that is robust. That is something that we will be spending a lot of time on.
John, I think this woman here, and then that gentleman, and then you.
I may or may not need this. I used to work in a lunchroom at a gym.
Hang on a second, Al. Can you? All right. Do you mind letting this woman? My apologies. Do you mind letting this woman go? Then we'll go to you.
So I have a couple of questions. One, I noticed wellness was up there. So specifically, what are we doing for officer wellness? In full disclosure, I've lived on the north side most of my life. I know a lot of the officers at the 4th Precinct. And I can tell you that after Jamal Mitchell was murdered, there was a lot. I was concerned. I was texting a couple of officers because I was concerned about their mental wellness, having watched one of their colleagues be murdered on the streets of Minneapolis. And so I noticed wellness is in there, but what specifically are we doing? Also, are we, we're talking about, you keep talking about redoing stuff with older officers who've been seasoned. I made a point of talking to a lot of the young cadets at CSOs in my community when I run into them, having conversations. Are you guys having conversations with them as to why they joined the force, what they're looking to do? And where it said there is a thing about complaints, is there also someplace on that dashboard, if you have a good interaction with police officers, where we can actually put that in there too?
Yes. The answer to the last one is yes. And,
Yeah, there's a little.
The answer to the last one is yes. What are we doing about officer wellness? The department and the city is working to improve working conditions so that the conditions make it a good place to work and stay, a good place to come. Dealing with the officers' trauma so that they deal with their own trauma. Seeing the horrific things that officers see is traumatic. They go home, they internalize that plays itself out in family issues, plays itself out in performance issues at work. Their peer support, you heard me talk about peer support, where officers can speak to other officers, their peers, to help them and give them the time and space without punishment and without stigmatizing, so that they can talk about the trauma they face that's causing them harms at home, harms at work. But we found that when we do that for officers and allow them the space to do it without retaliation and stigmatizing, they come to work, they don't call in sick, they perform better. They stay longer because the agency has done something for them to help them cope with what they see, instead of just saying, okay, go home, sleep it off, and come back tomorrow. Like, the days of doing that are long gone. And so working conditions, both in physical conditions and environmental conditions, and dealing with the trauma, giving them the space and time, and even time off to recover without punishment, is all of those things are happening. Policies are being written, training is being developed, but right now they're working on all of that as we speak.
I might ask, if you have a question, could you come to the mic? That way,
If we don't
you're
see you.
in the middle, we can see you, and if you just want to line up behind me, then everyone will get a turn.
If you're able.
If you're able.
not-
If you're not able, please just catch my attention and I'll come to you.
Al Flowers, a member of the UCMT.
Good.
You couldn't hear me?
I can't hear you.
Hey, a member of the UCMT, I got a question because this is directly with when George Floyd got murdered and they changed the policy. And I'm quoting off somebody, so I ain't committing plagiarism. I'm gonna read this off what Michelle and them did here, which I'm concerned about. And the duty to intervene has been weakened, changing that word from shall to may if an officer intervenes. And then when you look at the next one, and it talked about feasible, it talked about being if it's feasible to do that. And let me say why I did that. The Young People Task Force with the UCMT went to the legislature because they were taking DNA from black kids, young black kids, without their parent or judge permission. And MPD tried to change the policy, and they put that word feasible in there. And then when we talked to people like at Drew Evans at the BCA, and the word feasible said they can continue to do it. And that's what that word means to me. And I would say on our behalf, we went to the legislature, and now you can't do it, period, unless you get the judge or parent's permission. But we had to get it done at the legislature. All right, and it shouldn't, MPD probably should agree with that if something happened like with George Floyd, that you can intervene, you must intervene. So that word shouldn't be changed. I want to say that, reading off that. And then we can speak for ourselves too with gun pointing. We don't like guns pointed at us. We don't like that. And I'm a stand on, this is right here. That should be scrapped. And then when you see the percentage of the guns pointed at African Americans in here, almost 50%, with such a low population of African Americans, that's a lot. That's a lot of people got a gun to their head. So those two should be some kind of way changed. And I will take it back when we go to the PCRC and ask that these kind of things be stricken and be supported. This shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be happening, and we shouldn't let it happen. And as a black man, I'm saying, no, who done had a gun pointed at them, this is not okay, and we need to fix that one there. But on that shall or may, that people should intervene if somebody is doing something like what happened to George Floyd or any other incident, that word should stay shall and not may, because may mean, and feasible, if you look that up, you could keep doing what you're doing if you say feasible. And that's why they changed it. The MPD changed it, but they said they could still do it under that word feasible. And we went to the legislature and got legislation. The Young People Task Force did. So I'm putting that out there, and I'll stick up for those 2 bullets there. Thank you.
I'll tell you why that language is. So first, the de-escalation now is a shall. It's not you may. It is mandatory. But when you talk, there are certain situations where it is not feasible. You could have a hostage. You come on the scene, someone's about to shoot. You may not be able to de-escalate. So how do you evaluate that? Supervisors will review it, and will decide, was it feasible? But the training will take the officers through to make sure they understand when they should not have to de-escalate. But de-escalation will be the rule, and the failure to de-escalate, the justified failure to de-escalate, will be the exception, and that's what we'll be monitoring to make sure they do it that way.
Just a couple things. One real quick about this feasibility thing. In most model policies, it doesn't say when feasible. What it says is if it's not feasible, you must explain why you didn't do it. It's the opposite. And that is a better policy, and that's what we recommended, but y'all didn't take it up. The second thing I want to talk about this, I'm going to go back to the gun pointing again for 1 second, and that's this. I didn't just look at the numbers, I looked at why gun pointing was happening, and I can tell you it happened to traffic stops, it happened in suspicious vehicles, it happened in all kinds of situations where deadly force would never be justified. And the point is this, when the cops think somebody's pointing a gun at them, or even a cell phone sometimes, what's the first thing out of their mouth? I feared for my life. Well, let me tell you something. We fear for our lives too when they point their damn guns at us. That's why this is not okay, and it needs to be elevated to a level 2. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not, make no mistake, we're not defending the level of pointings. That pointing should only be used when there's a legitimate threat of deadly force, generally a legitimate threat of deadly force, and I don't think that's always been the case. We're going to look at it further. That's not always been the case. So through new policies, new training, that will come down, I expect.
Good day. My name is Melissa Newman. I'm a 4th Ward resident as well as the Commissioner for Oversight, Police Oversight in my ward. Regarding the weapon pointing, how can we support ELEFA in this process of recommendation, and how can you guys support us as well to be able to increase this from a level 1 to a level 2? I know I'll bring that back to the rest of the commissioners when we have our meeting, when we're talking about governmental policies and things of that nature. But above and beyond that, what can we do to support each other to get this change, as well as the ELEFA trainings? I know I've asked IA as well as MPD to try to be a part of, me and my other CCPO commissioners to be physically part of these trainings, and I'd like to be a part of some of the ELEFA ones too, if we can be invited to oversee as well as be a part of that training as well, just to physically have hands-on engage what that looks like.
Just to be clear, we don't do any training. Did you say the ELEFA training? It's the MPD's training. We just monitor. We don't do the training.
Yeah, maybe not you directly, but
yeah.
Who's ever administering the trainings that are provided by you, we would like to be a part of that and be invited to those trainings as well.
Yes, that makes sense. It was my understanding the CCPO does go through the training, but let me...
We do a few, but I would like to be present in the same room with police officers as well, doing some of these trainings.
I actually think that's a great idea. There's no secrets to the training, and I actually think if people got to see the training, they'd really feel much better. That's a transparency thing. So, and I don't think the department opposes it. It's not something we can do. So to answer both your question about training and pointings, take it to the department. And we can work together because we're going to look at the pointings and we're going to be evaluating the pointings and we'll be looking at the policies and training. So we'll have data information that we can share with you, but that is the exact kind of advocacy and engagement over and above what we can achieve that you all can achieve.
Hello, my name is Mauricio Ward, and I'm justice impacted, probably one of the few sitting in the room that's been through the criminal justice system. And like all that, I'm trying to sit here and be calm, but my question in the back of my mind is, who's going to take accountability for the next African-American male who's killed? Because all this stuff that you're talking about right now makes no sense to me, because you know, like I know, the culture, the racism that still exists and won't go anywhere based on any type of de-escalation, anything that you're putting together, because at the end of the day, it's about the perception of that officer and about the policemen's union. And I don't see them nowhere in this de-escalation, because all they're gonna do is give him a narrative to spin when he goes to court after he kills someone based on whatever. They still pull us over, they still point guns at us, and it's gonna continue to happen. And this means nothing to nobody. I don't understand why y'all even sitting here listening to this garbage, because they know how to fix the system, but they refuse to fix the system because it's working for certain individuals. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm for public safety, like everybody, but I don't think it's gonna come from these individuals sitting up here, nor the police officers. It's gonna come from our community, point blank and period. Thank you. I gotta run.
Mr. David and Mr. Michael, we really appreciate that you guys are coming back. This is your fourth meeting, right? I'm sure, fourth.
We did two the first time.
Third plus our
Something like that. But anyway, I think we just need to do better when it comes to the reason that we are all struggling. We are all Minneapolis. Minneapolis communities, cultural are divided, but all we are one at the end of the day. We all on the table. As the community doesn't have the trust, but it's doing better than it was a year ago or 2 years ago, building that trust with the Minneapolis Police Department, when we do need Minneapolis Police Department, but at the same time, you coming in here, and the reason that you've been chosen is build the trust between the community and the law enforcement Minneapolis community, which we all are working hard to do that, to protect our communities. Gun violence is going crazy, but we every day on the ground making sure, even though we don't have the resource, we don't have the issues that we like to struggle, that we don't know what to do, but I believe that if you do something different, we're going to see something different. As of today, I think these people who are sitting in this room are great, but where are the people? The African American, the Native communities? I don't see them. And you are the right place in North Minneapolis. When I drove by this road, I see a lot of African Americans sitting on the streets, but they could have been in this room learning about the policy and the good things that you're working on it. I'm looking forward to it when this policy that you're working on it, and I don't know when that will be implemented, but I see earlier you talked about the past and what it will look like the future. The future looks good, and I really appreciate the presentation, but when that will be, and how can we build this trust, and when will you do better to organize for a better community turnout for the next meeting? I appreciate you. Thank you.
We've struggled with community turnout. We are trying to get more turnout. We are working on some things that I hope we'll be able to report soon that will help, but we'd like as many people to come to our meetings as possible. We'd like people to come back. You've heard me talk about continuity, because we want the same people, so that the same people heard what we said about how we look at policies. We'll then hear about the policy changes, and then we'll talk about it. So we want people to work on that journey, take that journey with us. So we're working on increasing turnout, and we are open to any ideas, for how we can improve that.
Just 3 seconds. What you are doing, in our opinion from the community, is what's been ordered by a court, by Luciano. And I'm so grateful to see us here today in the real community. The community's job now is to monitor the monitors. Let's all of us get together, because the healing that's needed in our community will only come through us. Also, you in a quagmire, because there's an election year. Who's going to be the next? And the council president is here too. Who's going to say? But what we as a community got to do is come to the listening sessions. Don't attack you, because you paying to get the job done. We're going to help you to help us. I said 3 sections. And let's do it together, y'all. Because at the end of the day, whether there's a gun pointed at you or me, who's coming to be mentors to those who come out, the new class that's coming in? That's what we're about. Let's all us get together and let's work on those who are now coming out. We got a new class coming out, over 40-something people. Who's going to mentor them and tell them and educate them on 340-something pages? That's all I got to say, y'all. I'm so happy for us as the community being here to help what you got a job to do. Let's do this together. Let's do it together from community, please. God bless you. Amen.
Yeah, I'll applaud that. We completely agree. This is not our story. We're here to report you. This is not our story. This is your story. And we're going to be gone. So what we are trying to do is let you know what's going on, bring you into this process, and turn it over to you to keep it. And not only that, but to address the issues that aren't on the table today, because the challenges. So the ELEFA thing is education, empowerment, engagement. And that's what we are trying to drive through this process.
Hi, I just had a question because when you started your presentation, you talked about it's been approved by the MPD, approved. When is implementation occurring?
So the way the process works, and I'm sorry, Michael, I could...
No.
We approve the policy. They then train on the new policy, and once everyone's trained, then the policy is implemented, because once you have a policy, you discipline officers, you hold officers accountable, so you can't hold them accountable until you've trained them and taught them what's in the policy. And the truth is, people got it. There's like, training is not just about, here's the policy, someone read it and understand it. That's not what education and training is about. It's the policy sets the standards, and then you educate people as to what that really means. You explain it to them. You have them practice it in real life situations so that by the time you're holding them to accountable, they've had a fair chance to understand.
I think some of his answer and your question answers some of the other questions I think are in the room. Why it's taking so long? What takes so long? The training has to be developed on the approved policy. So we go through back and forth on what the policy looks like according to the national best practice standard, what the policy looks like. Then we develop a training on that policy. The training development takes a while. We have to approve the training and the lesson plans that go along with it, the training itself, the delivery of it, and then they have to train every member of the organization. Once they have done that, that is the definition of the word implemented. It's implemented because at that point we can say, now when you violate this, this is the consequence. Yes.
If I may, MPD's website says these policies will take effect 8/23/25, so very soon.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to, there may be some adjustments in the training, but I think that was the, yeah. Might change, but
I'm trying to put all this together. Do you, or does the MPD have anti-racism and cultural bias training as a routine part of its process?
Yes.
Is that part of the evaluation of an officer? And if so, how so?
Yes.
How so?
How so?
Yeah, how so? If an incident occurs, is there a rubric of some sort that evaluates whether or not racism came into play?
I don't know that that's in place yet. There is they are in the process of going to develop new performance evaluations, a whole new performance evaluation system. But they have to select a vendor to build the technology to do that. That has not happened yet, but that will happen. Because in this 4-year agreement, there are year 1 goals, year 2 goals, year 3 goals, and there are things that will happen in year 4. Some of that is a little further along, but some of the work has to be done by a vendor to build it. Some of the vendors haven't been onboarded just yet. But the city is in the process of doing all of that. But there will come a time when, yes, they will be able to assess whether there was bias or prejudice in officers' actions. And we'll be auditing and evaluating some of those stop, searches, and arrests and uses of force to be able to assess for ourselves also.
Okay, that's a little disappointing in how long police department has been in operation and this issue has been before it. I am surprised, to say the least, that that has not been addressed and made a formal part of the evaluation process. So if an officer, that's how you have things that occurred most recently, that's how that happens, is because you don't have in place something that catches, for lack of a better word, those kinds of occurrences. I would hope that that process is developed sooner than later, and that it is not part of some long-term strategy, but something that can be recommended by you, your organization, immediately. We should not have to wait for that. You've got plenty of evidence that this is a problem and that it should have been addressed, and police officers have to be measured against the rubric that includes racism and cultural bias. Okay?
We agree with you, and we say that to some degree that is why the department chose to do use of force first. Of all the policies they had to create and all the things they had to do, in choosing year 1, 2, and 3, year 4 goals, use of force being the most important, that's why the use of force was worked on first. We got that approved, the 17 policies that make up the total use of force. In that will be level 1 pointings. In that will be all the level 2s that supervisors have to review, every single one. And when they review it, if there are things that are in there that are violations of law or violations of policy, the appropriate action inside the department, outside the department should take place. Those are things ELEFA will be looking at, auditing and assessing.
And I'm saying that it needs to include the presence of racial bias.
Yes.
And that ought to be immediate.
Yes, got it.
This sort of got lost in my last question, but we have a lot of new officers, new recruits, CSOs, interns. Are you people meeting with them? Do people in this audience know that we have the current new officers coming up is the most diverse group of officers we have ever had in the city of Minneapolis? The vast majority of them are people from the city. And I would suggest to people, if you have not, if you see the CSOs, if you see the cadets, if you see these interns in your precinct, in the community, at community events, whatever, have conversations with them. Because I have talked to officers, the young people at the SOC, which is not all that far from my house, the Special Operations Center on DuPont, and at the 4th Precinct, but also just in the community. I've talked with them over in the 2nd Precinct. I've talked to a couple of them over in the 5th Precinct when I was doing something. Have conversations with these young officers. You're going to find out that they are wanting to be officers for the right reasons, that they want to help their city, that they really care about the people in their city, that they reflect all the diversity of our city. But they also need to hear from you what you want to see. And I know that some of the young officers have met with some of the groups in the city, like A Mother's Love and other groups, to know about the community. But we as citizens, that's part of our job too, is to talk to these new young officers and let them know about our city and what we want to see.
That's exactly right. This one.
So I really do appreciate those comments, and I will say this is that the officers who killed George Floyd, there were 2 recruits who were also diverse as well. So this is not the first time that we've had diverse officers in the city of Minneapolis. The concern becomes who's training those diverse officers who are eager to serve, but then they have people who are training them that we recently, because of what happened in the last week or so, we call into question who's training those officers.
Yes.
They come in eager, ready to serve with a good heart, and then they're trained by people that we are concerned about. Can you tell me what is your role in the approval process? Because you alluded to it earlier, that you can't make certain decisions, but in the paper it said that you approved of some of the things that we have concerns about.
Yeah, that there was a statement made to the paper that we had approved the individual who was doing the training. That's not accurate.
So that was wrong.
That was wrong. We did not approve the person, and I think to the extent the statement suggested we did, it was not accurate, because that's not, we don't have the authority. We weren't asked to approve. We didn't approve.
Let me ask you to use the mic so the whole room can hear your question.
Just looking at the policies and the training, what does the timeline look like from when you guys are evaluating the policy to making the changes, to creating the training manual, to actually enforcing this in a current training with an officer? Because it kind of seems like it's kind of spread out. So like something you've done within the last 3 months, maybe visited or put in a training session in a year from now. You know, am I incorrect?
No, that's been a big challenge. The policy drafting process has just been slow for a variety of reasons. Some was lack of experience in the department about drafting policies. Some was lack of capacity. We do have a review and approval and process where we discuss these things. Drafting policies that are clear and concise and comprehensive is really hard. So it has been slower than the department thought it would be when they developed their schedule. We did just meet. We are looking for ways to expedite the process to make it more efficient. We've learned some lessons, all of us, and we're trying to have tighter, but it's a slow process, and I can't give you one answer for how long it would take. So, for example, if we're talking about use of force, that was 17 different policies. Some policies are pretty short, we get them done quickly. Some stop, search, and arrest, huge issue. What we are working toward is we're now assessing based on what we learned from year one. We're working with the department, and they are now adjusting, and we're trying to, so they're going to come up, we hope, with a better schedule and timetable, and we can probably share that when we get that. But
yeah,
you're right, it's taken a long time, and we're trying to get it faster.
That's the A clause. The B clause is the development of the training to go along with it. Then when the the training is approved, then it is how do you put 600 people in a 3-day course, put 600 people through a 3-day course while continuing to provide public safety 24/7. And it's the department's projection on how long that also takes. And then we figure out deadlines and timelines.
I'm going to give Michelle the last formal question. It's 8 o'clock, but we're still here, so anybody who wants to hang around, we'll still be here, but after Michelle, we'll...
I just want to mention...
okay,
I'm sorry.
2 more,
My
I guess.
apologies. I thought you were done. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I just want to talk about culture real quick, because culture, controlling the culture of a department is the leader's job one, literally. That is the chief's job, is to address and control the culture of the department. And when we have things like Mark Hanneman being a trainer, being the head of the use of force training, the guy that killed Amirlock, and so many of these others, and by the way, you can see their history on the back with this trainers. A lot of these guys have serious issues. 3 of the trainers have killed people before. Some of them have dozens of complaints against them, things like that. That's a real problem. And one of the things that, I like that you're having supervisor training, that you're developing that, but until we have a chief that will take ownership of the culture of this department, we are never, ever going to get where we need to. And no matter how hard you all work, it'll be for naught if we do not have a chief that can take control of and manage this department. And you do that by setting expectations and rewarding the behavior you want and addressing the behavior you don't. And I don't see that happening with this chief. So I don't know if y'all need to put him through a leadership thing or what, but we need a chief that's going to do this job. So thank you.
Last comment or question?
I appreciate it. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Mara Shanfield. I live in Ward 2, and I serve on the Community Commission for Police Oversight.
Can you walk up a little?
Yes.
I just cannot hear.
My name is Mara. Is that better? And I serve on the Community Commission for Police Oversight in Ward 2. Ward 2?
It's on.
Okay, thank you. I need some help, and perhaps this is within your jurisdiction, or perhaps it's not. But the department, when they put out the policies, they're required under the settlement agreement to do this for 45 days, correct?
For the 4 core policy areas.
Yes.
Yes.
So for the other policies, they're putting them out for 30 days of review. That doesn't give us enough time as a committee and then as a full body to review and make thoughtful recommendations. We're scrambling. We had a meeting on Monday. We're scrambling to get in our recommendations on the EIS policy by tonight at midnight. So I'm asking for some support. I'm not sure who to go to, so I'm asking you. How would we get that deadline extended? How would we make all the policies have at least a 45-day window so that we could provide meaningful community feedback?
The short answer is, under the settlement agreement, they're only required to give the 45 days for the 4 core areas. But we did persuade them, and they didn't really resist, say, well, but we knew it would be hard to say to people, you get comment on these 4, but you get nothing. The balance we're trying to strike is that, to this point, 45 days, the process has so much time built in, so it was a compromise on 30 days. I'm circling back to talking about all the authority I don't have, but we don't have authority, but we can talk and we can work it. I don't think anyone's trying to be unduly rigid about it. So happy to talk about it. I don't want to promise something I can't deliver. All right, thank you all so much for coming. I don't know if there's still food out there, but if there is, please take it. And please come back to our next meeting, which I think is probably in November.
November, maybe.
November. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.